Welcome to the SCHEELS Outdoors Podcast, your source for information on hunting, fishing, and all of your outdoor passions.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SCHEELS Outdoors Podcast. My name is Mike Anderson, and to kick things off, we're going to highlight our SCHEELS Outdoors Customer of the Week. This week's winner is Steve K. of Western Montana. He sent in one of the coolest shed hunting photos I have ever personally seen, which is a beautiful shot from his deck with the mountains and a sunrise, along with a pile of really nice elk and mule deer sheds. That photo can be found on our Facebook or Instagram stories if you're listening to this podcast right as it goes live on Friday the 5th of February, or you can scroll back through our page posts of the main feed and find it there. Congratulations to Steve K. for being chosen as our SCHEELS Outdoors Customer of the Week. Now that big game hunting seasons are pretty much wrapped up across the country, we've really entered that preparation and research stage of hunting. One of the biggest questions to answer is developing an inventory of what animals you have to potentially chase in the upcoming hunting season. Shed hunting is an excellent way to do that. And today we're joined by 4 different guests in 4 different areas of the country to discuss how they shed hunt in their areas, tips and tricks to help improve your odds of success, and a few good stories along the way. Our first guest is Ben Morgan, who works in optics and muzzle loaders in our Johnstown, Colorado store. The next guest is Casey Davies, the assistant store leader in our Sandy, Utah SCHEELS. Casey and Ben will be providing a lot of insight into our western shed hunting and how that differs from the Midwest and southern areas. Our last 2 guests are Kyle Halseth and Kyle Klieforth, who both work in the hunting departments at our Eden Prairie, Minnesota and Eau Claire, Wisconsin stores. Those 2 guys and also myself will be covering a lot of your whitetail shed hunting concepts. Let's start things off with you, Ben. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and why you enjoy shed hunting so much.
Yeah, my name is Ben Morgan. I'll be coming up on my 12th year here with SCHEELS. Started back in 2009. Really learned a lot just from working at SCHEELS and being around all the people that we're surrounded by every day at work. I think I started with shed hunting just at a young age. It was a good way to get an ADD kid out running around enjoying wildlife with my son brother. Just trying to find sheds in North Dakota, whitetail primarily, and muleys. And now that I moved out here into Colorado is a big learning curve, not only just because of the terrain, because there's actually mountains out here, but there's actually different laws, which was kind of a wake-up call for me the day I got out here, because we actually do have a law set that you can't shed hunt from January 1st through April 30th. And the big reason for that is just to not put stress on all the big game animals and other wintering animals during that season. Trying to protect the wildlife is main purpose of it. So that was kind of a wake-up call for me. It stinks when you got April turkey season out here and you're hiking crazy. You're almost elk hunting birds. And if you see a shed, you can't pick it up until May 1st.
Man, that's got to be a huge bummer. Just going to mark that one on the GPS. Hopefully it's still there later.
Yep.
Right.
So just do a quick little mark on the Hunt Onyx map. Try to come back for it when the season opens up. But
there you go.
It's definitely different from that flat terrain that I'm used to.
Yeah, I believe that one for sure. So, all right, Casey, how about you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Casey Davies. Been with SCHEELS now for 7 years, working on my 8th year. Got really big into shed hunting probably my sophomore year of high school. I had a buddy that lived a few hours south of me that I would go down and he would show off his sheds that he had. And I was like, well, what are those? I've always hunted and stuff like that. But he started taking me out, and you know how it is. It's really rough the first couple of years until you start getting it figured out. And it just grew into a passion. I started, being able to explore a little bit further in like Nevada, Idaho, Wyoming, and just grew that passion, especially working here. There's a couple guys that shed hunted, and you know how it gets. You start talking about it, you bring sheds into work, and everybody gets excited. So it's just one of those things that I enjoy doing in the springtime. It's a nice way to stretch the legs and get moving. So
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a great activity to go out. You've been cooped up all winter, wondering what deer made it or what elk made it or whatever. So it's a ton of fun. Okay, now we have Kyle Halseth of Eden Prairie. Can you please give us an introduction, how you developed a passion for shed hunting?
Yeah, so I started at SCHEELS about 5 years ago down at the Rochester store. And, I started shed hunting at a really young age. And it just kind of branched out, especially when I started working for SCHEELS. Just like you guys were talking about, bringing sheds into work, showing them to people, running into customers on a daily basis, and just talking about shed hunting. They're showing you pictures while you're selling them a pair of boots or whatever it is. And it's just developed a passion for it. So I pretty much just stay in Minnesota with it. But I cover it top to bottom, all over the place, public land, private land, and it's a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Last but not least, we have Kyle Klieforth of Eau Claire. You know the drill, Kyle. Let's hear it.
Absolutely. So, hey guys, I'm Kyle Klieforth. I'm from the Eau Claire SCHEELS store. I've been with SCHEELS for just about 5 years now, and my story is pretty close to Ben's in the fact that I was always one of those kids that really just couldn't sit still. So my dad was in the outdoors his whole life and was big on shed hunting, and it really was about the second time I ever went with him. I was just kind of strolling out in the wide open, happened to stumble across a really big 5-point side, and once you find something like that kind of sticks with your whole life, cool shed like that, it kind of was instilled in my blood from then on. It's been an awesome sport, and it's something to do in the downtime of the year. So, and like other guys have said, you work at SCHEELS, everybody around you kind of does it, so it's something you can do and find them and show them off with your buddies, and it's something I look forward to every year, almost, I would say, just about as much as the actual hunting itself. It's quite a fun sport for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a total blast. And honestly, I kind of got started just the same way that you did. We were, I was out with my family, just walking around a little bit, and my mom actually tripped on this shed. It was just, we were going through some CRP, and she stumbled a little bit, like, oh, what did I walk over? And we pull it out of the CRP grass, and it was a 14-point side, just like pop can mass, one of those ones you just kind of dream about. And ever since we found that one, I just thought, okay, this is awesome. I need to start doing some serious shed hunting now. And it's a great way to get out, develop inventory for deer, see, and just learn about, where they are, how they're interacting, and, how you can potentially hunt them, especially in the late season, because, they're going to be in different areas at different times. But if you know where a deer is wintering, you have a pretty good idea where they're going to be in the late part of the season. So, Ben, when you were giving your introduction, you talked a little bit about like the legalities and the timing side of things, and how that's, how that's different in other areas, especially where you were initially from, and when you moved out to Colorado. Can you dive into about like the best timing and the legality portion of shed hunting?
Yeah, I would say, the main thing is just that you're following the rules. So, as long as you are going through May 1st through the end of the year, I would try to hit it early, because out here in the West, and JC, you might be able to touch on that too, it's probably a lot more competitive. There's a lot of monetary gain now in sheds. So you got people that do it for the passion and the love of it, and not saying that those guys that make money off it aren't super passionate and loving what they do. But there's a lot of people that are pretty competitive to make a decent amount of coin picking up horns and sheds and you name it. So that is kind of the big thing out here. I think you want to hit those pretty popular areas fast. Everyone always talks about those south-facing slopes. That's typically, you have a higher percentage of finding sheds on those, because that's where you're going to have less snow. More food is going to be available to the animals. That's where they're going to be wintering at. So those are kind of the areas that you're going to want to focus on. And you can, nowadays we have so much technology at our hands that, you can almost watch the wintering areas of elk, and kind of watch their migration and try to figure out where they kind of end up, and then really try to hit Google Earth or your whatever type of apps that you use, GPS apps like Hunonix or whatever, and really try to dive into those areas that you think they might be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you touched on a really important part of why there's shed hunting dates, and that's just the safety of the animals. And you don't want to put any extra stress on them during those difficult winter time periods. So when does the season actually open in your area? And are you still having to deal with a lot of snow or any other factors during that time?
Yeah, I mean, it's fully, depending on the year that we have, but I mean, May 1st is the opener, just after April 30th. So once that hits, and I guess I should say, and more specifically, that's just on the west side of I-25. So that's actually how they separate it. So you can actually shed hunt year round if you're east of I-25. But they use that interstate line as long as you're west of that, it has to be May 1st till the end of the year. That's the season of shed hunting. Okay.
So how about you, Casey? What are the similarities and differences versus what Ben's experiencing?
I mean, Ben's hitting it right on the nose, with the south-facing slopes, especially in the mountainous areas. That's the only place those animals can actually get down to the feed. I've noticed that like bigger bull elk or, bigger deer, they'll kind of ride that ridge and they'll even go on the backside. I've seen elk up to, their chest snow running around. So that's kind of the thing, you can find a lot more of the raghorns and stuff like that in the lower conditions, but some of those big bulls, I mean, they'll be pushing snow past their chest just to get away from people or, the pressure alone, but they're smarter than you think. That's for dang sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like he was saying in Colorado, you have that May 1st start. It's like a national holiday for me and my buddies. We run out to Nevada every year on May 1st. That's when their shed season opens as well. And, we'll take 4 or 5 days off and go out there and put 15, 16 miles in a day in and just kind of make a big kind of deal out of it, make a big camping trip out of it, which is a ton of fun. So
yeah, that would be super fun. So are you doing mostly shed hunting for elk, or are you doing mule deer, just whatever you find?
Yeah, I mean, like here in Utah, my kind of rule of thumb is, about Valentine's Day till about mid-March, I'll be focused on mule deer sheds. That's when they start to drop. And then after that, that's when I start kicking it over to elk sheds once the snow starts to get to more manageable level up in those higher elevations. Okay,
perfect. How about you, Kyle? When's the start date generally for you on shed hunting?
Start date, it's kind of dependent on the snow for me. Late January, February. It kind of depends on the season and when they're dropping. Of course, you see all those people online on Facebook, things like that, talking about deer that are dropping early, and it just gives you the itch to get out there. But waiting a little bit, letting some of the snow melt, it's tough when there's high pressure areas if you are on public land, because other people are out there, and then you'll be chasing boot tracks from there. But if you've got private land, for sure, letting that sit. My parents have some land up in northern Minnesota. I don't need to go hit that right away. That can definitely sit there, let the snow melt, hit some public land before I head up there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Kyle, number 2.
Well, he kind of hit it on the head. I mean, it's all dependent on whether you're on private or public, because when I'm on private land, I'm going to let that snow melt down. I don't want to let the snow completely melt away. But being in Wisconsin, we don't have a start or end date when you can or can't. So I'm going to completely leave it up to snowfall and weather. If you're on public land, we don't, have what Ben's got out in Colorado with guys that are looking to find sheds for profit typically, but you do have a lot of shed hunting traffic. So in those public areas, I'm gonna wait until, whether I've got cameras out or don't have cameras out, I'm gonna, watch those religiously. And if they're starting to drop, I'll look for them at any time. But ultimately, I'm gonna let that snow get down to where I don't want the snow to be completely gone, because you still want to see their travel routes. But you'd also, I'm not going to go trudging around out there when there's 1.5 feet of snow, because it's kind of a donation of your time. And on private land, I run cameras year round, so I'm waiting for those bucks to drop, and I'm going to wait until there's, some bare ground, but just a little bit of snow yet to be able to follow those runways and bedding areas, because you can walk around when the snow is gone on runways, but that's probably fall and rut activity, not necessarily where they were in the winter with the food sources and bedding areas, how those change in the winter due to weather. So,
yeah, I'd say I'm basically in the same boat as both of you, Kyle. You know, I spend a decent amount of time shed hunting in North Dakota and in Minnesota, some private, some public. A lot of times I'll let a camera determine if it's dropping, and you know, if I see a buck that dropped, then, you know, I'll probably check feeding sites. You know, like my parents have land and they have a food plot right in their backyard. So, I mean, I'll spend some time looking at all the tracks around there, but generally I won't venture too far into the transitions or the bedding areas until the snow is gone. So, and a little bit different on public stuff. You know, I'll try and be one of the first ones out there, but, you know, you just got to keep in mind that you really don't want to put any added stress on those animals. So there's kind of that fine line between being the first one to find the shed and putting pressure on that animal. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's nothing that makes you regret your decision faster than seeing a buck get kicked up and it's still got its antlers on.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like, oh, well, I found the perfect spot for it, but, you know, he hasn't dropped his headgear yet. So.
And it's hard with Facebook and social media nowadays. You know, you see these guys in the beginning, the middle of January that are picking up sheds, and you're like, oh man, it's time to get out there. But yeah, the bottom line is you get out there and start looking a little early and start pushing those animals around. You know, in Wisconsin, I can't speak for other states, but just about everybody's got a food plot planted now, and it seems like more and more people are leaving crops all winter. So if you're going to push that deer out of there 2, 3, 4 times, he can go up and over the bluff and find another food source. So you kind of got to be patient and just be happy for those people that are finding them early, because it's not the case everywhere for sure.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and I noticed that when Nevada actually started their shed season, because I shed hunted Nevada before they actually had a season. You could go out there, you know, middle of February, and guys be pushing animals all around. And I noticed after the season started, it started to become where they weren't pressured. They would start to drop in a more concentrated area, which was really nice. Instead of being walking 1.5 miles, 2 miles between sheds, you know, you're able to find 4 or 5 within a really small, like half-mile area, which made it nice to shed hunt. That's for dang sure.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Yeah. It's always nice when they're concentrated. You can find a group of them instead of walking 10 miles and maybe finding one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so let's talk about the weather conditions. What is the perfect day for you guys shed hunting in your area? How about you start, Ben?
Well, I mean, basically it's just going to be a lot of walking out here. A lot of aggressive walking if you need to get to the right spot. I mean, hardly ever is it just a nice path from road to the spot that you want to get to. And typically if it is nice, it's already hit up. So, I mean, I'm ideally looking for a pretty nice day, but it's pretty common here in the mountains to have a storm kind of roll in maybe midday or so, where you might get into some conditions with some rain or just high winds, stuff like that. But that's kind of the nice thing about shed hunting is you can kind of deal with whatever I guess you want to deal with. Mm-hmm. But ideally, I mean, you're just doing a lot of walking and just kind of trying to enjoy nature and hopefully find some sheds, and just get a good kind of workout. I mean, I kind of use that as a good training season. I mean, it's hard to get your legs ready for what you're going to be experiencing out in the field, in the mountains, in the gym alone. I mean, you kind of got to get up in there, get your boots broken. That's just a good way to do that. So ideally I'm looking for that nice day, but you know, if I'm cooped up long enough, I'll go on about anything.
Yeah. The perfect day is the day where you have a free day on your calendar, right?
Exactly. And I mean, it's nice to have the sun work. You know, I like to do a lot of glassing with optics, you know, using binocular spotters. So having that sun, where it can maybe get that antler to shine for you and really pick up, that's ideal. So I'd prefer to not go on an overcast day, but more than willing to.
Mm-hmm. Do any of you other guys have anything to add about weather conditions, perfect timing, stuff like that?
Interestingly enough, I would I think there's a difference between open ground glassing with binos and walking thick areas in Wisconsin in the woods. But over the years, I've always liked the overcast days myself for looking for sheds here. But I can see how, like, if you're out in the open glass and wide open areas, those elk sheds and stuff would probably shine in the sunlight. But overcast has always been my favorite for looking around here, and I don't know. I couldn't really pinpoint exactly why that would be, but whitetail sheds have always popped for me on overcast days when they're close quarters and thicker areas.
Yeah, Kyle, I couldn't agree more. Out west, I can see how they like that sun shining and stuff, but when we're in the woods and some stuff like that, when that sun's shining, you're going to get shadows and you're going to get some stuff that antlers just don't pop out like they do when everything's just the same color. When it's kind of that muggy feel outside, those antlers just stand out so much more, and I would way rather have it overcast or even some rain. Everything lays down a little bit more. Those antlers really pop out.
Yeah, I found some nice 90-inch oak stick sheds when it's sunny out. It seems.
Yeah.
You walk up, oh, nope, not a shed.
Oh, that's the worst, especially when there's quite a bit of snow on the ground. Like, you're walking around and then you see a stick that, you know, like, you're convinced it's a shed. You're walking up to it all excited and then pull it out of the ground and it's just a nice little oak branch. It's like, God, you got me again. All right, so let's talk about areas to shed hunt. What are you sort of keying on as potential areas to find sheds? Anyone feel free to start.
I look for big ridge tops that are south facing. I've noticed out here too, east facing slopes that tend to, hold a lot more animals just because that's where the sun's coming up and hitting it first thing in the morning. They're trying to get that warmth, that morning feed. Those are the areas I look for. And then also that transition from a thick bedding area to that south facing slope. So a lot of ridge tops and faces, big faces.
Yeah, and I would agree with that completely. I mean, that's kind of the things you want to focus on out here, and even checking like those drainages, because you just never know what might be down in there.
Yeah, I mean, we found some deer sheds in the bottom of 150-foot ravines, and you're like, how in the crap? Why was he down in there? But some of those areas get out of the weather, the wind. It's bizarre where they'll go sometimes.
Mm-hmm. So that's where with Minnesota, you're just most of Minnesota, you're not looking at the big hilly, cliffy region. I mean, yeah, you can get down near Rochester, the Whitewater area, and then you're looking at south-facing hillsides and some of that same stuff you guys are talking about. But when you're looking at the majority of Minnesota where it's flat farmland, you're basically just going off of food sources and bedding. And you find those two, you find where they're feeding and just zigzag it back and forth between the two. And that's all they're worried about in the winter is getting a bite to eat and going to sleep. So,
yeah, I mean, I would agree. I mean, in Wisconsin and Minnesota, I mean, everybody keys on the food in the bedding area, but the transition in between seems to be where I find the majority of my sheds. I mean, a lot of guys will just focus just on the food sources, and it's actually pretty rare when I find it. I mean, I got a lot of private land with good food sources that stand throughout the winter, but trying to find a whitetail shed in a cornfield is another example of not wanting a sunny day because everything looks like a shed out there. But those transitions between the bedding, and a lot of guys are like, well, they're spending the most, part of the day bedded down, and wherever they're spending the most of their day, that should be where the sheds are. But they're not doing a lot of moving around too when they're bedded down. I mean, it's occasional you'll find a shed in a bed, but when they're moving their head and moving their body and jumping fences and maneuvering, that's a lot of times when those sheds are going to kick off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head there, Kyle. Like where I'm shed hunting, it is pretty much flat as a pancake. I mean, I live in Fargo, North Dakota, just super, super flat. And then, I hunt a lot in Minnesota, like maybe an hour or two to the east of Fargo, and all that stuff is like, it's super flat. I almost wish that I had some elevation changes to kind of restrict them a little bit. But, what you were talking about as far as looking in a cornfield, that is, if you want a challenge, go find a cornfield and try and find sheds in there. Cause like I'll actually have, maybe one that I picked up earlier. I'll like toss it in the corn and try and like look and see where it is. And a lot of times I'll have a hard time finding one that I just tossed out in that corn, because everything looks, it looks so much like everything else with the colors and all that. Fence rows are great. I've also had a lot of good luck if deer are crossing a creek or a river. Like when they're coming up the bank or they're going down the bank, it seems like they're putting a lot of pressure on their front legs, and it seems like they'll fall then. But yeah, just finding the food, finding the bedding, and getting there and in between is how I've found a lot of my success with that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the farmers in the Midwest have better luck finding the sheds with their tires than you do walking those corn rows.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know how many farmers I've had complain to me that they got too many sheds out there and they're losing tires and losing money.
I found the biggest set of sheds in my life last year, and I found the one side, and I turned the woods blue on the tracker on Onyx Maps trying to find it, and the last place that was left was the cut cornfield, and that was the same way. I mean, by the time I got done, I think I had put like 13 miles on just in the cornfield, and it was solid blue, and finally ended up finding it, but it was like, man, if that was the last place I wanted to have to look for it, I can tell you that.
For sure. So when you guys are out shed hunting, what is your pace? How fast are you going?
I'm pretty slow and steady. I mean, you're going to cover a lot of ground. I mean, you might as well enjoy it while you're doing it, but I'd like to do, I don't know, I might be a little different, but I actually like glassing a lot while I'm walking. So if I see like a good area that I can actually kind of get a nice angle on, that I can feel like I can glass a lot, I do try to do that. But I mean, it just depends on what you're walking. I mean, sometimes you have a little faster pace because you're just trying to zigzag and cover as much as possible, and you can kind of see everything you need to see. But there are some of those areas that you come up on that you can glass a lot while you walk, and you kind of almost have better luck spotting it that way.
So how far are you traveling in between your glassing points usually?
It's hard to say. I mean, it just completely depends on the area. I mean, if you can get on top of like those ridges and kind of glass the other ridges, that's probably the easiest way. When you got like kind of those nice open tops where you don't have too much debris, I mean, you can really glass those. But sometimes I'll be in the thicket, and I feel like sometimes my binos can show the antler better than my eyes can. So I'll just kind of pitter patter between focus points and just kind of glass. I mean, I might go every 200 yards or so and kind of glass again just to see if he'll pick up better.
Yeah, I'm kind of that same way. For glassing for me, I mean, I notice a lot of people don't pull their binos out as they're walking around. If I see something 50 yards away that might be questionable, it might look like a tine sticking up above. I can't tell you how many times I've thrown it up and like, it's a stick, and then put my binos on it. It's like, sure enough, that's a shed. And you're like, would have walked right past that one. So when in doubt, glass it out is my rule.
Perfect. Yeah, there's a good saying. When in doubt, glass it out. Okay, how about Wisconsin, Minnesota? What's your pace?
I think it really depends on the area. I mean, if you're in the timber and you're walking some thick stuff, I will be moving, because if you're just on one trail, I'll go as fast paced as I can, just covering that one trail, cover some ground. But there's definitely some areas, if you're out on a CRP field or where you've got some area to look around, slow down, just keep looking, don't get distracted, basically. And just keep moving, but don't be afraid to slow down and take some time, because you will walk right past them.
Yeah, I mean, I think he hits on a good point. I mean, there's a change in pace depending on where I am and what terrain I'm looking at. If I'm looking at thick stuff, I'm going to slow down a little bit, but also a lot of those areas, there could be 30 different runways going through the same patch. So if you're going to cover them all, I mean, a snail's pace isn't going to cover them for sure. So I'll move at a pretty good clip, but if I'm in a thicker area where I'm, trying to find a matching, and that's another thing too. If I found one side and I feel like the other side could be close, then I'll really slow my pace down. But if I'm trying to cover some ground, a lot of times I'll be moving at a pretty good clip.
Yeah, I would
not
say
jogging, but it's,
yeah.
you gotta cover ground too. But it's finding that happy medium. Some guys' eyes work different than other guys. So
I think the key thing there is actually like keeping your eyes up. I mean, I think I see too many people that just walk with their head straight down. And at that point, I mean, you might as well just step on it and you probably have a better chance finding it, in my personal opinion. I mean, you got to keep your eyes kind of down to make sure you're not stepping into a cactus or, something bad. But at the same token, I think you always just got to keep your eyes looking forward and kind of glassing ahead of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For my pace personally, I go too fast. I get too excited. Like I'm finally out in the woods. I've been cooped up all winter. It's like, man, I just want to cover some ground and look at some stuff. And I've found, more than once that I'll be going through an area and it'll get thick and there's multiple trails. And then I just stop. I want to, text my buddy, see where he's at. And then all of a sudden I look up and there's a shed 15 feet away. It's like, well, I'm glad I picked this completely random spot to stop, because I'd have probably just walked right by that sucker.
I think it's pretty rare that they're laying right on the runway that you're walking on. So I think Ben's point is pretty important there, is keeping your eyes up and looking off to the side, because the idea that you're going to pick the right runway to find that shed on is pretty rare. So keeping your eyes peeled and scanning the area is pretty important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of times I'll let the sign determine how fast I want to go to. Like if I'm just walking to an area, I don't see tracks all over the place, I'm not gonna keep as keen of an eye then. But if I'm walking in between a food and a bedding area and I see 20, 30 different trails and all kinds of deer sign and droppings, and you know that they've been there recently and have been hanging out there for long periods of time. Like, okay, here's a place where you really need to slow down. You need to look, you need to get your binos out, because there's, probability of a shed being in that area that you can just look and see that it's high traffic. That's where you're going to want to spend some time.
So, yeah, I think the binoculars and spotting scopes and stuff like that are really forgot about around Minnesota and the Dakotas. I know they've been talking about it out in Colorado and Utah, stuff like that, but it is so beneficial here as well. Even if you come up to a split on the trail, you have to pick one of them to go on. So I always take my binoculars and I'll run that other trail as far as I can follow it with my binoculars, and then go on that one that I chose, because a lot of times you'll be following that, even if it's through the woods, and all of a sudden you'll see something sitting along the trail if it's a heavily traveled trail. So,
yeah, and I agree with you. I mean, I remember my days back in the Midwest, and I think you'd kind of pick like that late season, like right kind of first drop. And I just remember driving, and if there wasn't any fresh snow, I mean, you'd just be looking at the top of the snow and seeing if there's any sheds laying on the top. I mean, you could cover a lot of terrain with just a spotter in a vehicle, looking for whitetail sheds. So
yeah, I mean that's actually one thing that I haven't really used in doing shed hunting is a spotting scope. And thinking about it, that's a pretty beneficial tool to have. Even if you can't see miles, if you can see hundreds of yards, that spotting scope is a very valuable piece of equipment to have. And that kind of brings me to my next point. What's in your guys' pack for a day shed hunting?
Well, I mean, I can start. Essentially, I mean, probably the most important thing, because you're just going to be walking until your heart's content. I mean, definitely bringing plenty of water, snacks, just some clothes for if the weather changes, stuff like that. But I always try to make sure I have like zip ties or paracord, something to keep them together, keep them on my pack, so I'm not worried about dropping stuff that I just found. In Colorado, I've yet to be that brave with the public land, but I mean, having a trail camera, in my opinion, is a good idea, because if you're starting to find a lot of stuff in an area, I mean, you might as well watch the area too. Could be good during the hunting season. But yeah, mainly, I mean, walking sticks are sometimes nice to have, but just having various types of ropes, and if you got a friend, walkie-talkie, stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. A lot of snacks. We go out, we're out for the day. We'll be out from 9 o'clock till sundown most of the time, and having plenty of water. I have a dog that I shed hunt with as well, so packing her water. Big thing for me is also a GPS, marking some spots and starting to find consistencies, possibly with topographical features on the maps. So you can start to kind of study and be like, okay, well, in this area, I found them in this elevation or in this kind of ravine. So if I go try a new area, you can kind of look at the same patterns. I like electrical tape for keeping the sheds together. You can get a little bit tighter bond. You don't get that bounce.
Yeah.
Paracord coming loose. I've tried paracord, but yeah, electrical tape works a lot better for me.
Yeah.
You guys touch on a lot of the good stuff. I mean, of course, snacks are the go-to to have with. You're burning calories. You need to be replacing that water. One of the main things that I make sure I bring with if I'm doing a full day of shed hunting, even if it's not in my pack but in the truck or something, is an extra pair of socks, even an extra pair of boots. Because if you step in a ditch or a puddle and you're getting wet, that can end your day of shed hunting pretty quick. So bring it with some extra gear like that, because if you're going to get hot, you might get sweaty. Having some extra clothes to throw on can definitely keep you going longer.
I'm a little different in the food aspect. I'm more of a 10,000 calorie one meal guy, so not a lot of snacks in my backpack. But I'm more of I got a bottle of water with me, probably an empty pack, just trying to be optimistic. I do have a shed dog that I shed hunt with. She's obviously not in my pack, but probably my biggest tool is going to be Onyx maps that I take with me. I try and always tell customers this too. But
Yeah.
In the Midwest, a lot of these guys now have gotten into keeping the pressure down on your property. So it's pretty often, it's not very often that we're walking through our property and putting pressure on it. So if I'm going to go in there shed hunting, I'm going to have my Onyx maps with me, and I'm going to have my tracker on, because it's going to be the best time throughout the year to walk all these runways and be able to track myself, so I know where these deer are moving throughout the property. So I'll actually track all the runways, and then I know where a lot of the traveling routes are. So that's one of my favorite things to do is while I'm shed hunting, is to track myself with my phone, and Onyx makes that pretty easy nowadays. I know there's other apps out there too, but that's just the one that I've chosen to use.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that.
There's so much valuable information to be learned when you're shed hunting. You might not be hunting, but you're trying to gain as much information as possible on those animals to increase your success the next season or seasons down the road. And it's great to see, patterns that will develop too. Like, okay, I found a shed here last year. I found a shed 500 yards away the year before. You can really start increasing your success with the more information that you gather being out there. And as far as what's in your pack, I'm pretty much in the same boat as all you guys. But one thing I'd like to touch on is just layering. When I start out the day, I'm in pretty good layers, and maybe start a field edge going really slow, and then once I start to heat up a little bit, I'm taking my jacket and dumping it in my pack, which is generally pretty empty, besides some trail mix, definitely enough water, and something to keep those sheds too. But yeah, layering is super important here. I really like to use a base layer and a vest, because it'll keep my core warm, but then I still have good range of motion, and can really enjoy my day out there. And a good pair of boots is super essential. I guess that really depends on the area you're going. Like the boots out, you'd use out in Colorado, Ben, is going to be different than the boots that I'm going to be using in the flat as a pancake Fargo, North Dakota area. It gets pretty wet, and all the snow is generally melting. So I really like to use a pair of uninsulated rubber boots, so I can stay pretty dry. And then I always have like a backup pair in my truck, because if I end up stepping in a creek or breaking through a little slough or something, and I'm wet up to my knees, that's not a good day when something like that's happening for you.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess one little thing I did forget to touch on, I don't know if you guys added to your pack, but I mean, just like a lightweight bone saw, in case you come up on like a pretty giant deadhead or something like that. If you need to remove some of it just to lighten it up, it's kind of nice to have.
Yeah, talking about deadheads, it's actually kind of funny. In Utah, you can't legally pick them up without the DNR coming out and inspecting them. So that's one of those
geez.
we really deal with, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's the same way in North Dakota too. I found a couple of nice ones. Like I was out mule deer hunting. I found a good mule deer deadhead, and some nice whitetails too. It's like, oh, I want to keep that. I want to bring it home, but I can't lift it. So it's just like, take a good picture, remember it that way. But yeah, it's kind of a bummer in those areas. So a majority of shed hunting is generally done walking, but do any of you guys use vehicles or ATVs to cover a decent amount of ground when you're out there?
Not personally. I mean, it's pretty much all feet. I think when I was back in the Midwest in North Dakota, I think that's when I used my vehicle most. Not really into stuff per se, but just running the roads and running your run and then just glassing it. But that was probably the most I've ever used a vehicle. Other than that, it's just a lot of walking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, not really for the actual shed hunting part of it, but I have used four-wheelers just to kind of figure out, hone in on some areas where where they did winter. And that's all on private land. It's just going through the trails and stuff that are already there and kind of finding some areas to hit on, then coming back and walking them, because it's going to be pretty tough to find one riding on a four-wheeler or in a vehicle, but I know you can do it. You're going to miss some, though.
Yeah, absolutely. But I've seen quite a few people already posting pictures there. A lot of them are just driving down the road, seeing sheds. It's like, man, I should really keep my eyes peeled a little bit more when I'm driving down those roads, because they're dropping now. It's a decent way to find them.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. So a couple of you guys touched on having dogs to help you with shed hunting. Can you go into how you trained them to become shed hunting dogs and how they assist you out there?
Yeah, if you want to go, Kyle. My dog's just in the puppy stage, so I'm still in the process of actually training her. I'm starting this year to be her first big year. It was just more or less just hiking with her last year. But I'm interested to hear what Kyle's got to say, because I'm in that process currently. So
perfect.
So my female lab she's about a year and a half old, so she's by no means perfected at this point. But the biggest thing with the training process with that is, there's a lot of tools out there, and I started with Jeremy Moore's horn process. The biggest thing with her was, even as a puppy, it sounds almost cruel, but the only toys she was really presented were deer horns in general. So when that's the major toy they're playing with, that's, they're going to fall in love with the horns. And then it just eventually, we moved into training in the backyard, looking for sheds, in the backyard, and then moving into a harder habitat like the woods. And the biggest thing with that, the biggest learning curve I can tell people is the mistake I made from day one was putting the sheds out in the yard without having rubber gloves on. And the biggest thing with that is she was smelling me versus the shed. So I don't want to get too far on a tangent with that, but that is a really important thing, because, they need to be smelling the actual pedicle of the horn versus hand scent. So when I started training with her, I was working with sheds in the backyard and in the woods, and she'd find them like crazy. And I was like, man, this dog is going to be like a superstar. And then when I went to shed hunting the first year, I was like, man, I'm finding sheds and she's running, running by them. So then it was kind of like, digging deep into what am I doing wrong with that. And that was kind of the biggest thing that arose, was she was smelling me versus the actual horns. So when I started working more with rubber gloves and the horns and the scent from Jeremy Moore, that all kind of came full circle and helped a lot.
Mm-hmm. So how did you get to that point where, where you're just out in the woods running around, the dog thinks we're having a great time, to, okay, I know I'm shed hunting right now? How do you get there?
It's going to sound ridiculous, but just the word horn. She'll go ballistic when you just say the word horn, because that's, that was her biggest toy growing up. So you say horn, it's like, oh, it's time to, get serious. And there are times where they'll, they're dogs, so they like to, they start meandering. It seems like they're running too fast or not paying attention, just using the word horn. That kind of hones them in. They're like, oh yeah, we're looking for horns. I know what that is, But the biggest thing was just starting with just the only toy in the house, really was a shed, and then working with, the shed equipment that we'll actually sell in stores. And another thing is working with, that was having the sheds presented from an early age was huge, but if they're actually playing with those sheds and they do, hurt their mouth with the sharp horns, that can be a turnoff too. So when they're younger, presenting them, something that looks just like a horn with the scent on it, but something soft was important too, because I've heard stories of that too, where guys, they'll give them real sheds and they're playing with that nonstop. And if they do, poke their mouth or something, that can be a big turnoff for them with shed antlers, especially with how sharp some whitetail horns can be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes
Kyle,
sense.
How did you get that kind of puppy playing instinct, like where the antler is a chew toy, to not turn into a chew toy later on when you're actually out there trying to find sheds?
Well, easiest thing was as soon as, when you're playing with it and you give it to them, as soon as it turns into a, chewing on it, the horn would get taken out, taken away right away. At the beginning when she was young and I was trying to get like the love of it, before I would let her chew on it. But when she, got a little bit older, closer to a year old, when it was chew time, it would get taken away right now. And the whole fetch thing, that all came from just training in her. She's a lab, so, a chocolate lab. So from an early age, she's out of a kennel in Minnesota, which was a sport dog, breed. So she had the retrieving down from day one, but the whole taken away when she chews was, that's important too, because otherwise they're just going to find them and go lay down somewhere and you're going to be like, where is she? And she's just chewing on the horn you want. So.
Yeah. So when your dog does find sheds, are you giving her quite a bit of praise? Are you giving her treats every time it happens, or what's going on there?
Pocket of treats is what I typically work with. And no, unless you can work with them, and, we all have full-time jobs and it's a busy schedule and work, she's not perfect by any means, but any bonus sheds I get out of her is a huge bonus for me. So it was always like a pocket of treats. And when she finds one, praise and treats and stuff. And there's still instances where she'll pick one up and drop it halfway to you or something like that. So they're never perfect, but I like getting her out in the woods and taking her with me. And if she finds a bonus shed, that's a bonus for me. And it's always a good time.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. So Casey, do you have an itinerary set up? How exactly you're going to work on training that new dog of yours?
Yeah, we've been working the last couple of weeks, just that anticipation of getting out of ice season out here into shed hunting, working in the backyard, working in some local parks and stuff like that, just trying to get that introduction. She's a German short hair, so last year we worked mainly on birds and upland stuff, and then this year was my year to kind of focus on the sheds. So I'm actually going to be picking up that same thing he was talking about, Kyle, getting, the scents and the I think it's like a plastic or a rubber horn, isn't it?
It's a rubber horn, which I think is just so important, because if they literally get poked, it can be the end of their obsession with horns, because it's no longer a positive image with the horn. So.
Yeah, and I think the scent for sure, will help her kind of start to identify the difference of my hand. Like that's a good tip with the rubber gloves. Something I haven't thought of, where she's starting to pick up on my scent might be the issue I have right now. So,
yeah, great information. All right. Well, I'd like to do a little bit of story time here. I'm sure everyone's got some stories about shed hunting in the woods. I'd like to hear each of your favorite stories on shed hunting. So, Ben, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure. I probably have a favorite back in North Dakota and a favorite out here. But probably my favorite in North Dakota that I experienced was I was after kind of just the main buck, is the biggest buck that I had on the property at the time. And is the first deer that I've ever actually got to come out aggressively to a grunt call. So there's a lot of emotion behind getting this deer. And sadly, I just was never able to get the job done. But during the time of the year where I'm looking for sheds, I actually found his matching set antlers side by side. So that was pretty cool, pretty rare. But I mean, they literally both fell, 6 inches from each other. So it was pretty cool to get his set, which was just awesome to have, even though I never got that deer. Just to have his sheds was cool. And then out here in Colorado is probably when I finally got my first one. I was actually out just being the camera guy in an archery hunt for a buddy that got a good tag, and we actually got to kind of a burn line, and just kind of looking through a whole lot of nothing. I mean, just a bunch of trees and everything's kind of burnt up. I finally saw my first elk shed. So it was pretty exciting being a North Dakota boy to finally get your hands on an elk shed. And that was pretty exhilarating to finally get the stars aligned on that one.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So with that buck that you were trying to target and found his sheds, did you get him on trail camera again the next year?
What happened is I never saw the deer again. So yeah, it was pretty sad. Kind of was all excited to get after him the next year, and he just never showed up again. So that's about all I had to remember him by.
Oh man, that's frustrating. But it is really cool to develop histories with animals like that. You get them on camera, you get their sheds, get them on camera again, hunt the next year. I mean, I've seen plenty of people that'll take like trophy shots and have 2 or 3 years worth of sheds from them. It's like, man, that is pretty cool to have.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So, Casey, how about you?
Yeah, so mine's actually from last year. Going into the season, we wanted to focus on elk sheds was our big thing. And in Nevada, the couple other spots that we've been hitting the last few years is mainly mule deer sheds. You'd find an occasional elk shed, but I wanted to find a spot that I could really get guys into, a good heaping amount of elk sheds. And so I started doing a bunch of research, finding where the good units were at, and figuring, okay, well, this is the best unit, so probably guys are going to be going to this, so let's find a neighboring unit to it. And so I probably put, 20 hours of research into Google Earth and, different hunt odds and how many trophies come out of the unit and stuff like that. And never stepped foot on this area in Nevada. And a load of guys went down there and just kind of a shot in the dark. And we ended up coming out with, I believe it was 40 elk sheds between 4 of us. And it was just that pride, I guess, of I could figure it out through my years of experience and all that stuff. Finding a spot like that was killer. And going into it, we were not expecting much. We had a goal of, I think, like 3 or 4 sheds each, and to come out that heavy was a good time. And probably the craziest part of that was I kind of hit a new spot with my buddy in that area. It was the 3rd day, and drove down, started glassing this hillside, picked up on one shed. It was a big elk shed, and I started walking a little bit closer, got a different angle on it, found his other side was just like 50 yards above it. Walked up, picked him up, sitting there, kind of celebrating and stuff like that, and ended up turning around and walking up the hill and found another set of brown elk sheds. So it was just kind of cool. It was like that rod and 2 brown sets within 100 yards of each other was a lot of fun.
Oh man,
it was
that's a heck of a day right there. Like 40, that's pretty awesome. And it goes to show you that, you can do a lot of research and improve your odds. You just kind of never stop learning when it comes to shed hunting. You start figuring a few things out and then doing a little research to compound off of that. And it just really increases your success.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
You get kind of like the thing that, we were in, you get used to hunting the same areas. You shed hunting the same spot. Oh, we're going to hit this spot over and over again. And just being able to branch out and find that, branching out actually can provide success was a big deal for me. So.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. So Kyle, Halseth, how about you?
Mine's got to be just my first major shed that I remember finding. It was up at my parents' property, and I was out by myself in the backwoods, just putting on some miles, and stumbled upon a big 5-point side. And it was a big one. And just that first time finding one, and I was young. I mean, I was probably 11 or 12. and just bringing that back to the house to show my dad, my brothers and stuff. And that's one that sticks with me, and that's kind of what sparked it all. So just keep grinding and try to find those big ones.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Do you have any deer where you have multiple years of sheds with them?
Just 2 or 3 maybe, but nothing that's crazy where they're like big ones that you can really, really see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to find a couple of those. Like I had a really good transition area next to, a little ways away from a food source, and they would always take this corridor. It was in North Dakota, so it was a tree row. Surprise, surprise. But I had a camera on this, like the plus sign of this pinch point, and I saw pretty nice buck. It was a 5x5, and he come in like every 3 days, and then I saw a picture where he had one off, and I ended up actually finding the other side that was still connected during the picture time, but it kind of told me like, okay, this is when I can go out and look, because there wasn't a ton of snow, and I knew the deer were bedding in a different area. So I knew I wasn't going to put pressure on them walking in this tree row. So, but it's super cool to be able to see like year after year sheds. Like this buck put on probably 15 inches. I think I found him as a 2.5, and then again as a 3.5, and then he just became a ghost for me. But yeah. So Kyle, you got a good story for us?
Yeah, I've got plenty of good stories, but I would have to say, one of my favorite things about shed hunting is just the fact that you're going to see some deer that, if you got good food sources, you're going to see some deer that you just don't see throughout the year, even with the rut, when they're traveling through the rut. And last year we bought a new farm in Wisconsin, and I didn't really know any of the neighbors, and I had gotten a couple calls from the one neighbor saying that he was seeing just an absolute giant typical buck out in their field. And I was thinking to myself, well, I had cameras out all year. The biggest thing I had, I didn't have anything real big on camera. And it's kind of been, I think it's everybody's dream as a whitetail hunter. It's different out west, but just to shoot a Boone and Crockett deer. So it's always kind of been a dream of mine to find a Boone and Crockett set of sheds. You never know what the spread is, but you kind of get the point. But so he kept calling me, telling me that he was seeing this buck out there. And then I ran into him on the road one day, and he was explaining it to me. And I'm like, well, that doesn't sound like anything I've got on camera. And I had already been through our property, but I was like, well, I'll gather up some of my buddies from SCHEELS here, and we'll go look again. And we had only looked for about 5 minutes, and I found a 5-point side that was, it was just huge. And I'm just like looking at it, and everybody's like high-fiving and hollering and stuff. And I'm looking at it like, I've definitely never seen this deer before. And then earlier I was talking about looking for the other side of it when I was mentioning the cornfield, and I had basically highlighted the whole property. I'd put on like 16 miles on 120 acres trying to find the other side, and I was like, it's just not here. Then I got looking at the cornfield, and I was like, well, I guess I can spend a whole nother day walking out there. So the next time, we were off for 4 weeks because SCHEELS was closed down, and so I had plenty of time to look, and I spent another day there looking. I highlighted the whole field, and I called my dad, and I was like, it's just not here. I don't know if he traveled back to where he, does his summer and fall ranges. And I was actually on the phone with him walking out, and there was a little part of like standing corn, and like the leaves were all hung over, and I was trying to just like bust my way through it. Let me punch my bottle here. But I'm maneuvering through it, and it caught on my leg. Like the deer had like an extra mean beam on the one side, and it caught on my pant leg. And he's like, I looked down, I'm like, I think I just fell on the other side and it's on my leg. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, it's on my leg right now. Like I just caught it on my leg. So I picked it up, and I don't think I'll ever forget that, because it just is a goofy story and it's kind of hard. But what are the chances I took that route out of the corn, and I had looked the whole day, and I probably looked from 7 in the morning till like 4 o'clock in the afternoon in that cornfield, because it was pretty good size, and to catch it on my leg was kind of a ridiculous story, but something I'll never forget for sure.
Yeah, for sure. It's just, there's quite a bit of luck involved in shed hunting. You can train your eyes, and you can do research to find the right areas, but a lot of it really just comes down to like looking in the right spot at the right time with the right sun angle. And, you just can't really let yourself get discouraged because, luck tends to turn around sooner or later.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably re-walk the same spot 5 times and you might find one on the 5th. So.
Yeah, I've had that happen more than once. I shed hunt an area pretty thoroughly, and then like a month later, I'm thinking about doing food plots, and I walk through, and then there's a shed right there. It's like, how did I not find that the first 3 times I went out there?
I had been through that area 2 times when that guy had told me he was seeing that deer, and I don't know if he shed after that or I just had walked past it, but just the thought of the fact that those horns could be rotting out there if that guy didn't tell me that he had been seeing that deer. I live 2 hours from or hour and a half from where I hunt, so I wasn't going to see that deer coming out in the field that time of year, so it was kind of a cool story.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
I don't know if any of you guys have long archery seasons like we did back in North Dakota, but I've actually had a deer shed right before my eyes as I was drawing back on it with my bow in early January, 3 days before the season was about to end. So got to do a little catch and release action on a really nice 5x5 that I was more than happy to shoot, and he just happened to look aggressively at me. Off.
Wow. Do you end up shooting that deer then, or no, or let it pass?
The funny thing is that threw me off so much that I almost lost track of what I was doing. And by the time that I got back on him, he jolted. It just made me laugh. I mean, I met up with my dad and brother later, and I was like, well, I got a catch and release tonight, but that was about it.
That's wild.
I mean, you got the blood just fresh on the tip. I mean, probably one of my only sheds that's never been touched by a squirrel, or a mouse or whatever, just perfect condition. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. All right. Well, I've got a pretty crazy story about shed hunting that I'd like to share. It was out in North Dakota. I had access to this river bottom piece. It was 120 acres of river bottom, and there's a nice food plot on there. And then we'd also put hay bales out on the side to really just get them to winter there, because it's almost a perfect property. There was a big ravine of bedding that the neighbors had, and then on the other side there was a whole bunch of state land. So it's we have the food in the middle and bedding on each side, so, and no one's going to really go in there and walk around. So I would wait till the snow would go down. There was plenty of time, but this specific year I had a trail camera out. I was monitoring the bales and a couple of trails, and it got to March. So I figured, okay, the animals have shed by now, so I just want to go out and I want to pull my camera. I am just dying to see what is on this camera. So, and it snowed a lot that year. There was 2-3 feet of snow back there. So I had put on my snowshoes and got across the river and was going, and I was with a buddy too, and we were 2/3 of a mile back to get into where this food plot and these bales are at. And I get 2/3 of the way across the field, and I'm about maybe 75 yards away from these bales. And I'm just looking around, seeing if there's sheds anywhere. And then all of a sudden I see this animal get out of the bales and then start slinking away. And I'm like, oh, it must be a deer. And I look, and it's oh, that's not a deer. What is that? And then it hit me that it was a mountain lion. So this mountain lion had made a den in these bales. It had dug itself kind of a makeshift den, and it was sitting there, and it was waiting for these deer to come to feed. There was so much snow, there was so much pressure. These deer would just, they'd come in, and this cat would pounce on him. And he had actually stacked up deer like cordwood next to him on the side of the bales. There was four different deer. A couple of them weren't even really touched. He would I don't know if he was sport killing or stacking them up or whatever, But I got up there and, you know, because when I saw the mountain lion run away, the wind was blowing at him. So like he knew I was there. I mean, I could have been one of them deer in that pile, but thankfully I had a buddy with me. So I think that I think he didn't want to mess with two people. So at that point I'm like, well, I'm 2/3 of a mile from my truck. I am screwed if this cat wants to come at me. All I have is like one deer horn and a knife in my pocket. Like I didn't bring a gun with or anything. So I go up there and I see like this big imprint area where you could see that the mountain lion had pounced on one of the deer and literally drug it back to that pile. So
wow.
At this point, I'm like, I can't believe I'm even alive right now. Like if I would have been alone, if I'd have walked right up to that pile of bales, like I don't even know what would have happened. So I just like grab my camera and start running, get the heck out of there. And I get home and I check my camera and I have 2 pictures of this mountain lion, like 3 days away from when I found him. So my camera was out there from December to March and it was still running, and I got pictures of this cat. So it was pretty wild, scary, but you know, like North Dakota, an hour away from Fargo, you really don't see mountain lions, so you don't really think of anything like that. But it's an experience that I'll never forget, that's for sure.
That's nuts.
Yeah, I mean, that going back to adding stuff to your pack, that is something I pack as a sidearm. I have ran across mountain lions a few times out here in the mountains, and it's fun. Sure. So, because they're going through winter and they're hungry right now too. So it is something definitely a real threat out here is mountain lions. You're in their winter grounds, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Good idea to pack a sidearm out there.
Right.
You know? Mm-hmm. It's just not something you really think about when you're in the Midwest and flat ground and stuff like that.
Bizarre. Making a den out of hay bales. That's bizarre, man. I've never heard that.
Yeah, it's wild. It's the first time that I'd ever seen anything remotely like that. But it was just, you know, it was kind of the conditions. Like everything was so stressed. The winter was so long, and you know, it was an opportunity for that cat. So, you know, and like I knew the winter was really harsh, so I wasn't going out there trudging around all over the place, but I'm like, I just want to get my camera. You know, a deer's not going to be out in that field in the middle of the day, and if it does, it's going to, you know, see me and trot away a little bit, so I'm not going to put a ton of stress on them. But yeah, pretty crazy stuff.
Mike, how many people do you tell that story to and they're like, yeah, right, no way?
Well, they tend to believe me because we actually got that cat a week later.
Oh, really?
So yeah, there was a friend I have out there that does predator control, and knows people that knows a guide outfit that does it out in the Badlands. So at this point, like I was actually hunting guiding at the time too. So I'm like, I don't want to have any client have to worry about this. Like, this cat needs to go. We need to get rid of it. So I called him up and told him the story, and he's like, okay, well, we'll set up, you know, he's already got animals there. He's probably going to come back. He's made himself a den. So the guy ended up, setting up on him once, hitting it and running, you know, tracking it for a little ways, and then it got dark, and it's like, well, I'm not going after a wounded cat. So they called his guide service, and then they got dogs, and they found it really fast, actually. Like they found it within an hour, and he's, you know, had him treed up there, and he's taking these pictures, like, you know, how you see like the Eiffel Tower and you put your fingers out so it looks like you're holding it. He's like holding his index finger out, and it looks like the cat's perched on there, and ended up shooting it. And it was a pretty wild deal around here. So yeah, people believe that story because I can prove it.
He's got pictures to prove.
Yeah. Oh, so, well, we've covered a lot of great information, had some good stories. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. Do any of you guys have any last tips or suggestions, anything we haven't covered in this shed episode that you'd like to share with the viewers?
I think the only thing that I would add for new people is I hear a lot of people talking about they have a good hunting spot and they never find sheds on it. And that's because they're just not wintering there. It can be a phenomenal hunting spot. It can be the best spot that you're seeing big bucks all the time. But if they're not wintering there and they're not spending their time there when they're shedding their antlers, you're just not going to find them. So don't focus on good hunting spots. Focus on those good spots that they are when it's the correct time of the year.
Yeah, that's some excellent advice there.
I mean, my advice is just persistence. I mean, I would just not give up. I mean, when I came out here, I didn't know where to go, where people go, what are heavily traveled areas. I mean, you have so many recreational people that are constantly out here and enjoying all of the public land that's out here. It's hard to really know, I guess, how many people are out here looking for sheds or how many people are just walking around. But I would just say, just go for the mile and just cover as much ground as you can and just have fun doing it. I mean, whether you find one or not, I mean, I would just keep doing it. I mean, if anything, you're always getting something out of it. You're learning new lands. You're learning more about your upcoming seasons. And then you're just having a good time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you're getting yourself in shape too. Just a lot of great preparation comes along with shed hunting.
Yeah, it's not. Shed hunting certainly isn't a lazy man sport by any means. I mean, you're gonna put on a lot of miles, and you're certainly, I don't care how good of an area, and you're not gonna find sheds every single day. You're gonna have good days and you're gonna have bad days. But like Ben said, if you can just find some positive out of it, find a new bedding area or find a new promising spot for next fall. You may not have found a shed, but it might lead to shooting the deer that you're looking for as sheds the next fall. So look for the positives in the day, even if you don't find a shed, because there's going to be a day where you're going to find 10, 15 of them. So it's just have fun.
Mm-hmm.
There's plenty of fun to be had.
Yeah, I was going to say, just, keep after it. Like Ben was saying, you can get discouraged, real quick and want to give up for the season, but man, just keep grinding, get out of your comfort zone is the big thing. And something that we live by out here is nothing's too steep. You look at a hillside, you're looking up at it, that's ways up there. But I can tell you right now, if you go up it, nothing's too steep. Once you get to the top and you actually find something, it's very well worth it. Get out of your comfort zone, I guess, is my big tip.
Okay, great to hear. And I mean, my tip would be, if you have kids or if you have youth, get them out there, introduce them to shed hunting. Do it in the end part of your season when the weather's warmer, it's nicer, they can enjoy it, and bring yourself one that you found already, because the kid's not going to know that the shed is new, but like to see the look in their eyes and the excitement when, especially like my 5-year-old daughter, I'll bring her out and I'll just toss a shed to the side and I'll be like, Mia, I think there's something around here. What's over there? And it's like when she finds that first shed, just watching her eyes light up, it just makes it so fun, and it gets the kids excited about getting out to the outdoors, experience new things. So that would be my number one tip for sure, is introduce the youth to it.
Yeah.
She's going to be after you in 5 years when she watches this podcast, and she's like,
Dad, you actually put that shed there? Oh man. But no, she found her very first shed when she was 3, and she found a spike. It was like 4 inches tall, and she goes and she picks it up off the ground and she's like, Daddy, look at this. And I'm like, that is a real shed. That is a 4-inch spike. There is no way I ever would have seen that, but my 3-year-old daughter is now teaching me tricks on how to shed hunt.
So maybe the new trick is closer to the ground is better.
Yeah,
walk around just crouch position.
Yeah, I'll maybe save that for you guys. Why don't you let me know how that works out for you? Oh, cool. Well, that's a ton of great information, guys. I'm excited to get out into the woods, do some shed hunting, hopefully find some of them deer that we had passed on this year, find some new ones to target for the upcoming season. Thank you for your time. Best of luck. Best of luck out there, shed season. If you guys find something, you better be tagging SCHEELS Outdoors so we can see what you get.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah,
for sure.
Perfect. All right. Well, have a good one, guys.
Yeah, you too.
Good luck, guys.
Good luck.
Yeah, good luck.
You just heard our session with SCHEELS experts Ben Morgan, KC Davies, Kyle Halseth, and Kyle Klieforth on shed hunting tips and tricks from various areas of the country. Hopefully this segment inspired you to get out and try some shed hunting this spring. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out on either the comments of this podcast or through social media at SCHEELS Outdoors Facebook or Instagram. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please give us a follow on the listening platform you chose today. And with that, I want to thank you all for listening and see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the SCHEELS Outdoors Podcast. Stay tuned for future segments and visit our social media pages, SCHEELS Outdoors on Facebook and Instagram for daily updates.